Well, guys, welcome to KC Happy Hour. We are back. We were supposed to obviously go on the air yesterday, ended up on the air here tonight, and we've got a little bit of our crew kind of all over the place because of that, with the Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp servers going down yesterday. We were afraid we wouldn't get to see all you guys if we went live just after about an hour after we went back online. So we decided to delay it to today, but we're still going to go over everything we just saw over the weekend because there was racing all over. There was racing coming up. There was news coming out of the weekend, of course. A whole lot of action. And again, all that stuff happening over the last few days. And then we just had a full blackout on the social media stuff. So there's so much to catch up on. We've got a couple of our crew here. Brandon Jarsacrack and Connor Zilish are here with us. Braden Eves just is still kind of figuring everything out and decompressing and getting his stuff in order after Mid-Ohio, which was a wild weekend for him, of course, finishing the Indy Pro 2000 championship. He is the vice champion, and he's obviously got a lot of work to do to try and put himself together in Indy Lights campaign for 2022. Ryan Norberg is actually mid-air right now. He is on his way to North Carolina, and Paulie Massimino is picking up the man who writes his checks, picking up his dad for the airport. So he was a little busy tonight too, but he couldn't get out of that. But we've got these guys here. We've got some really cool guests that we want to introduce, of course. Mr. Dan Roach is here from Briggs Stratton, who is going to be talking with us in depth as we get towards the end of the show. We're going to have a full one-on-one interview with just me and Dan, talking about everything from Briggs, of course, the success over the weekend, 400-plus entries for the CKNA Grand Nationals. We've also got our West Coast correspondent joining us for the show, who will be joining us on a regular, semi-permanent basis, and Matt Keys. Matt's obviously a West Coast guy, NorCal kid. And Matt's been around the block for a good bit when it comes to karting and racing out west. His brother, his family, they've owned racetracks. They've been a big part of it all. So we'll get to all those guys. First up, though, lots of news coming over the weekend. First and foremost, I wanted to touch on this, and I wanted to have Braden, and I think we'll have an episode coming up really soon with a couple of other Formula Car drivers that have been able to use karting as a launching pad and put the budgets they need together to go Formula Car racing, to talk to what the next landscape looks like for 2022, or what it looks like so far. Because while we focus on karting as an internal sport, at the end of the day, it is a launching pad for those that want to have racing aspirations outside of karting. If they want to jump over to a different kind, the standard is going open wheel. So there have been some new things out of that. The last few years, everyone's gone to the F4 U.S. Championship Series, and that series then launches typically into US F2000 or into the US F3, which is known as FR Americas, because the F4 car is a good bit slower than the US F2000 series. So understanding that, the guys at the Road to Indy decided to launch the USF Juniors Championship. That championship is going to run Cooper tires on the car. It's going to be a USF Juniors Championship with, I think the goal is to be 14 and over with the age, and basically not only compete a little bit with the USF4 title, but at least bring things in-house, because it was recently announced, of course, Penske taking over the Indy Lights series, taking the rights back from that. So while Penske takes the top two rungs, going from the top rung there were three rungs below it that Anderson ran: Indy Pro 2000, which is the championship that Braden just ran, USF 2000, and then, of course, they had Indy Lights, and now they're going to go one level below it and make USF Juniors. On top of that, the F4 championship itself also has announced a junior series with a similar type setup. It's going to be 4 weekends instead of 6. That's going to be 14 plus. That's going to run, I believe, in companion with some F4 races. I can't remember exactly how it all is going to line up, but the idea is that as a feeder into the F4 US series, going to use the exact same car, just going to be for the younger drivers. And it's something was absolutely needed for the F4 US series, because that one seemed to have a lot more cautions, obviously, for a lot of races, and they've been trying to solve that problem for quite some time now, because they were a lower budget series to USF 2000, a slower car. Then on top of that as well, the Gustavo Jacomins Academy series has added dates for 2022 from where they were, and that's something new also, where his schedule last season, I actually, when I worked for the Academy Winter Championship, was 2 rounds. It was just at Sebring and at Homestead. It is now going to be expanding to 7, or at least that's the goal. And that is kind of an unofficial winter training championship. Those weekends in the past had USF 2000 and Indy Pro 2000 guys come and test, and then they would run official races with the F4 cars, and they will let the F3 guys test there too. So it's kind of like an official combined test weekend. That's a lot of drivers use. Obviously, they test with different teams. You go and try out, see if you like the atmosphere, if you like the car, you like the engineers, and if it's what you like. But they also have races with it. And Gustavo, I think they've done a really good job with the way that it's structured. It's obviously cheaper than running a track on their own. And when they do the F4 races and the F3 races, they do it a lot like how the Road to Indy and the F4 Series try to do, just as well. Which is train the drivers on, anything from media, help them with media, to also doing general driver coaching as well. So they'll have kind of like roaming the race officials act as coaches. Longtime Carter Matt Jaskell was the race director for the series last year. So they're going to a lot of rounds. The thing I think that's important, and the reason why I wanted to bring it up in this episode, is that for better or for worse, what it does, it's going to allow you with an F4 car to have a lot of seat time. And this is the only downside. I think it's really good that USF is bringing the stuff in-house, because what's unfortunate for guys that look at the F4 ladder, as good as the F4 car is to train on, and it's a better transition, just like an F1600 car, before you go into the Road to Indy, you're racing typically at a race weekend where IndyCar teams are not there. And that's the biggest benefit that the Road to Indy has, is that you've got IndyCar teams, you've got Indy Lights teams in the paddock, and they're just watching your racing, because they're obviously, just waiting to go out on track themselves. So you end up getting a much bigger audience. But now the only downside really for this for all these championships coming together is we're kind of looking at a very similar landscape to what we see in the U.S. scene on the 4-stroke side, on the 2-stroke side when it comes to karting, and what a lot of guys see on the dirt scene, where there's going to be a lot of races that you can run an F4 car in. And so what I broke down here is that, the Pirella, Motorsports Group, which is the group that owns F4 and FR Americas, and then obviously we'll have that Formula Development Championship is what they're calling it, which is the feeder to F4 US. So obviously you can't run F4 US and you can't be in the development series, but you could run either or, and you could still run USF Juniors, because USF Juniors has the same requirements, 14 years of age and over. And then on top of that, you could run the Academy, because the Academy has been kind of that series as well for F4 drivers, where you could run at a younger age in the car before you could in the official championships. And then I don't know. And then if you are over the age of either 6, I'm guessing probably 16 will be the new bumped up age for the F4 US championship. You could still go run USF Juniors, and you could still run the Academy series, because there's no cap on the age. So the issue now is that you're looking at a championship with the USF series having, 6 races is going to be USF Juniors. The Academy's got 8 race dates on their calendar there. You saw the through the winter. And then the Pirella Championship is going to have 4. So you'd be running anywhere from, 15 to 20 races potentially with the car. And this doesn't include what the team typically will do as well, which is run SCCA and NASA races and stuff like that. And the only reason, again, we circle all this back to bring it up is the idea is these guys are trying to limit cost, right? They're trying to go cheaper than USF 2000 or cheaper where the stuff ends up. But with so many series competing and being able to take the same car to both, there's obviously going to be some drivers that are going to run all these series, and it's going to be a big leg up, because unlike basketball and unlike football, you can't go out and practice an F4 car. And being in a race format with high grip and, really the Racecraft is what you learn, because the cars are relatively slow. So you do learn how to drive them on the test weekends, but there's going to be kids on the grid that are going to have what in the past few years was 2 or 3 years of seasons of experience. Now all getting that before you even get on the grid. Let's say for the USF Junior Series, you might be up against another rookie that's also got about 8 races in it. So it's just something for parents when they look at to keep in mind as well. Is I don't know if there will be any parents that do this kind of worst case doomsday scenario, but it's interesting, and it's going to be fun to see on the sidelines as a guy who doesn't have the budget behind me to race cars, and the rest of us as well that aren't on that open wheel ladder. I'm interested to see what we get Braden on. Christian Brooks we're going to have on the show as well, who's a guy who just finished the USF 2000 championship inside the top 5. He's looking to run Indy Pro 2000. Both of those guys had run about a season in F4. Braden ran about, I think, 5 or 6 total weekends over 2 seasons. And then Christian ran a full season, but a full season previously was 6 to 8 races. Now a full season in that car could be double that in a single year. So it's just interesting stuff to keep in mind on, again, as you kind of look towards that and whether or not they feel like that's needed, whether it's better to stay in whatever you're doing before it and save your budget, or just jump straight to USF 2000. So anyway, that's all the news that's come out of it, is that there's now going to be a lot of opportunities to run an F4 car. The good news is the resale value for the guys that have them, there's going to be a lot of places you can run them, but we're going to kind of keep a tab on it because there are a lot of kids that do jump over to run these junior Formula Car series, and how that situation shapes up looking into next year as well, because there are going to be some kids, I would imagine, that will run both, because there are a lot of kids that already run the Road to Indy and run the F4 and FR series. Moving back over to the guys that we do have over here in the studio, though, I want to talk about the racing that did happen over the weekend karting-wise. So the CKNA Grand Nationals got underway, 400 plus entries, and we'll talk about this a lot more with Dan when we went in there. Brandon, you were there with me. That event, it's funny, right? Because you feel like you know a lot of people in the sport, and then you go to a race that has a completely different crowd. And I was getting you mic'd up on the grid, and I was like, "Hey, Brandon, why don't you go talk to some guys?" And you're like, "Yeah, I don't really know anyone here."
Yeah, it was a very cool event. When you roll through the gate, it was actually way more busy than a go-kart race that I've seen there in a very long time. Like you can see from the picture, there's people all the way back to the gravel access road where we normally park like extra trailers and stuff like that. Those were all actual pit spaces that people had to push all the way to the grid for. And like along the lines you were saying, like I was trying to walk up and down the grid and talk to some people, but quite frankly, I didn't know very many people there. And I met a lot of people this weekend, and everyone was pretty friendly, and it was a really good weekend overall.
And let's talk to you can't really tell fully, but I think to me the biggest difference was in total drivers, because you have so many double entries of guys that run medium and light or medium and heavy. I think we're probably, even though there were about 404 total entries, probably around the 350 mark, which is about 50 or so more, maybe 100 more than a Pro Tour or USPKS event there. But the biggest difference was there wasn't that much car parking. You could see in that small corner in the very top left of the screen, that's the rows of cars, and then there were some on the pavement behind the building. There was a lot of privateers and campers and people that made a pilgrimage out of it. I mean, this is the club race national event of the year, and it was something that was so cool for us. We've got our full video coming out, and we're also, of course, going to run the winners along the bottom of the screen. And when Dan Roach is able to get himself all situated and back in here as well, we're going to talk to him about a lot of stuff with Briggs. But, big winners over the weekend, of course. Brandon was involved with the battle for the lead and the win in 206 senior medium, in 206 senior light as well, was close, right? all the way up until the rain just decided to get into the carburetor.
Yeah, it was I thought I had the win locked up. We led, 13 of the 15 laps, and then all of a sudden, well, it was raining the whole time, so I had a feeling it was going to happen. We forgot to put the air filter cover on when we were switching from slicks to rains. We just barely had enough time to put the rain tires on, so we kind of skipped over that part and thought maybe we would squeak by, but it started downpouring with like 4 to go, and the air filter got completely soaked, and then the motor wouldn't run the last 4 laps, and unfortunately, Colin caught me and passed me, and I wound up finishing 4th, and he went on for the win. But other than that, it was a really good weekend. We showed a lot of good pace with the Coyote chassis. We have done a lot of testing this last half of the year, and it was good to see it all finally pay off, qualifying 2 poles, a heat race win, and then fastest lap in both finals, both in wet and drying conditions. And unfortunately, we couldn't bring home the top spot, but I definitely think we made a lot of progress.
And Connor, we'll pass it on to you here in just a moment and talk to you about what you've got going on with everything from the Trans Am weekend all the way over to the SCCA runoffs. You've been on the road. This is actually your first little bit at home. You've got yourself a little break.
Why am I?
Oh, there you go. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I was on the road for a while. We were gone from Thursday 2 weeks ago, Thursday or Wednesday 2 weeks ago up until just recently, 3 days ago. So yeah, I was on the road for a while, but had a ton of fun racing the Trans Am. I got pole there, and then went to runoffs and finished third out of 90 some odd spec Miatas. So pretty successful 2 weeks, and now it's good to be home.
Yeah, and you've still got a championship to fight for going into GoPro here in a week and a half.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Hopefully we can pull it off. I think KA is gonna be good. X30, it's gonna be a battle. So hopefully we can come out with two of them.
Now, Matt, let's pass it over here to you. Let's talk West Coast stuff, because we didn't even get to get a graphic up because SKUSA hadn't posted too much about it. But Cali ProKart Challenge, which is the only real decent sized West Coast series right now that runs beyond the winter.
Right.
Blake Nash has been really good. K Junior, Jesus Vasquez, I think, won the majority of the season. Then Blake won the majority in senior. Anything else notable that we had over at CalSpeed for the finale?
Nothing too crazy. It's surprising kind of to see Kyle Wick beat Billy Musgrave. Obviously, that's kind of Musgrave's stomping ground, his home track. K senior final was really good because you had Oliver Calvo qualified pole for the race on Sunday, which kind of made the championship interesting because that made it down to the point where if Blake won the championship, and if Oliver won the championship. Then you also had Trey Brown, who was really fast. So it was definitely a good mix with the top three race-wise, because everyone kind of had their own thing going on. Oliver and Blake were going for the championship, and Trey didn't really have any skin in the game prior, so he was kind of just going for the win, and it made for a really good race. So overall, entries weren't too crazy, but the racing was really good, and in all three of the main classes, junior, senior, and shifter.
And unlike the guy below me here, Dan, who helps lead the program on the absolutely dominant 206 racing that we've seen in the country, there is a lot of engines in limbo out west, because you've got Challenge of the Americas, the hat you're wearing, coming up in the winter. They just announced their dates and their locations for next year. It still allows the KA in the 100cc class, but obviously runs rock motors, everything else. This year didn't see a lot of guys in rock GP. From what you heard in the paddock, is everyone's prepping for Vegas and then into next year? Is there going to be a lot of the same from what we saw this year, or is everyone kind of shifting one way or the other?
So next year, for as far as the Challenge of the Americas goes in California Rock, you're going to see the main classes being Rock Shifter. Rock Shifter is probably going to be the biggest next year. I know a lot of people are moving on to that. And then as far as the 100cc, that's going to be bigger than GP is my guess. I don't know many people that are going to be running the GP. I know we're running it in Vegas, but not for Challenge. We're looking more at the shifter side of things. So it'll be interesting to see it next year, but I think you'll see a growth spurt in the shifter stuff, and I think 100cc will stay the same. But I think GP on the West Coast is just struggling, as well as the tag stuff for SKUSA. I mean, for ProKart, there hasn't been any X30s the whole entire year, so it's just all been 100cc stuff, which is interesting to see when compared to the East Coast, where it's not the opposite, but they definitely do have a lot of X30s. So it'll be interesting to see next year how things end up.
Right. Well, because, I think the big difference was when you look back at California ProKart, especially in years past, that was what those guys spent their money on versus SKUSA Winter Series, especially a lot of the X30 guys based out west. I think what SKUSA realized when they went out to California for the home Winter Nationals a couple of years ago is like all the Cali guys are used to flying and following anyway. So even though it was cool that they had kind of a SoCal base race, it was actually one of the smaller races they've had because their whole base follows them. So when the guys are spending their money running coast to coast already, they come back home. The only guys that couldn't afford to do that are running 100cc rather than run an X30 there. It's a little different for sure. But anyway, I wanted to have Matt come on because he's given a little bit of perspective. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But now that we've got you back here, Dan, before we go to commercial, a quick bit of words, of course. And I'm going to put this picture back up on the screen because it's such a cool shot, obviously, having the place packed out. How proud are you of everything, especially getting through COVID, being able to have such a successful September, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But to have this event kind of go off pretty much without a hitch, no red flags, no nothing. Oh, no, we lost him again. Well, on that note, as he tries to sort the connection out, we'll come right back here. Yeah, we'll move on. We'll come back. We are going to talk about a lot of the Racecraft, though, because we talked about a lot of that last week. And the cool part about the CKNA Grands is that there's a full live stream. So with the four of us here, and hopefully with Dan when he's able to get his connection back on in, we're going to talk about the stuff we thought should have been done, shouldn't have been done, and kind of analyze a few clips that I've pulled up to go a little bit more in depth of how guys ended up winning or running good or not running so good at CKNA Grands last weekend. So we're going to go to commercial when we come back. More stuff from CKNA Grands. We still have our interview with Dan here in just a moment as he gets set and is back in the studio. And again, stick with us, guys. We'll be right back.
You'd be hard-pressed to find a team that has won more races, won more championships, and produced more top-level drivers than Rollison Performance Group in the last decade. RPG is most commonly known as the premier driver development program in North America, specifically based on the team's unique approach when it comes to fostering talent. Rather than looking at things on a race-by-race basis, RPG focuses on building season-based plans for each driver, each with a heavy weight towards private training weekends at their home base at Pat's Acres Racing Complex. Each training weekend puts drivers on track with national champions such as Ryan Norberg, Austin Garrison, and Luke Selikin for hundreds of laps. Add that to the meticulous equipment prep done by RPG's team of professional mechanics, and you've got a winning combination. For more information on how to start your driver development journey with RPG, visit RollisonPerformanceGroup.com. Kart Store USA is a kart parts supplier that racers and retailers can count on when they need reliable advice and service. We focus on servicing all racers with honesty and pride while maintaining customer satisfaction. We carry a full stock of Kart Republic and Tony Kart chassis, as well as IAMI and Vortex Rock engines. We've also got a host of other parts available and in stock, such as products from Rev Performance Materials, Jecco Racing Seats, and more. We have a 100% satisfaction guarantee, and on top of that, if your order exceeds $200, shipping is on us. Check out all we have to offer today by visiting us online at kartstore-usa.com.
Well, guys, welcome back here. We do have Dan back here with us. Dan, it looks like we've at least got you for a moment, and hopefully it'll stay. I've got the other guys out because I just wanted to give you a chance to have the floor. And again, let's talk about how proud you've got to be of the CKNA Grands. This was the first year, I think, without any red flags at this event, too, for as big as it's gotten.
Yeah, with all the conditions and everything, it was just amazing to see the turnout, the quality of competition, the variety of locales that people were representing. It was just, it was a true national event, and it went off without a hitch. We are super, super proud from Briggs Stratton, the whole team.
Yeah, and we'll bring the guys back in here because there was a lot of hard racing out of it. And last week we dived into how to win, how not to win. First and foremost, there was a lot of rain racing, so that kind of goes out the window. But I did want to pull up a little bit of clip here and also give some love. Adrian Cruz and Colin Warren were the two guys who got away early on in the 206 senior medium final. And both of them were running really good and had over almost 2 seconds back to Brandon, back to Gary. But as the video will show, this is with 2 laps to go. And this is something Gary had talked about. He thought with 2 laps to go.
Crossover move by Colin.
But he had started blocking at the 2 to go when they had a 2-driver breakaway. And so one thing I always tell my drivers whenever we're coaching or anyone that I see is that if you have more than 2 drivers in a pack, you absolutely want to be the leader. But in this case here, in Adrian's case, he's used to running, when he runs 206 racing, at North Texas Kartway back home in Denton, Texas, which is a short racetrack. Now, I'm not saying Adrian hasn't run all over. Adrian's a very well-accomplished K100 racer. He's been consistently clocking in the top 10 at SKUSA Pro Tour and at US ProKart Series events. Huge kudos to him, his family operation, the Cruise Racing Development Crew with him and his dad and his mom. They're a really hard-working bunch, and a big congrats again for them running as good as they did, for leading as many laps as he did. But he hasn't run the 206 stuff at such a large racetrack, and I think he absolutely underestimated how much time he would lose and give up in that 2-kart group by starting to block. And maybe that was a strategy too, because there's always the chance that you could back the driver in second up where he starts battling with third. But in this case, they ended up biting him here because Colin was able to get the leg up on him. And then as they came around to the white flag, then he tried to cross him over, got put over on the outside. Colin, even there, we talked to him a little bit post-race, and you'll see this in the edit. And he was trying to work with him, but he was like, hey, honestly, man, as soon as he started blocking, he had to go. He wanted to probably wait to the last few corners. And that's where he's won a lot of his races. Instead, with the drafting and pack racing, he ends up getting shuffled back to fourth, and that's about where he ends up riding for the majority of the final lap. So walking back, obviously the first thing in his shoes, Brandon, Connor, Matt, you guys got to see there, and we'll bring Dan back into the studio. But he ended up backing things up. Brandon, you obviously knew exactly what you needed to try and do for where you were at. If you're in Colin's spot, if you're in Adrian's spot, does that play out different, or what would you take away from it?
Yeah, so I personally thought Adrian started blocking way too early and way too aggressively, especially on a track like Newcastle. With the 206, I mean, most of the corners, your braking zone was very, very small. So it was very difficult for someone to get underneath you, especially when someone's like a similar pace as you, as like Colin and Adrian were. So I think he definitely blocked too early and a little bit too much, and that brought me and Gary back into it. Now, I mean, I love that he blocked because otherwise there was no chance of me and Gary getting into it. But from Colin's standpoint, I think he kind of played it perfectly because he was just patient enough until Adrian slipped up that little bit. And if Colin would have waited any longer to get around him, me and Gary probably would have went right around Colin and Adrian all at the same time. So I think Colin played it pretty perfect, and I think Adrian just blocked just a little bit too soon.
And that is on the nicer side. The bigger thing that we have to talk about with 206 racing, we didn't brush up on too much, is when to back out and when not to. And for a lot of drivers in 206 racing, when you have someone try to challenge you, here's an example, this one being a little bit in the rain, but fighting really early on. We talked in the heat racing or about heat racing last week, right? The idea with heat racing is to try and survive. Well, right here, we're about halfway through. You can see the cross flags being given. Brandon's going down the inside. And as he ends up going on down, you can see the driver on the outside. He's going to fight him. He's going to crowd him. Both of them end up sideways because he goes a lot lower. See, at this point in the rain line, they were running about maybe a lane, 2 lanes higher than where the car on the outside, Corey Tolles, was wanting to run. And Tolles, most of the weekend was doing this. I was trying to find more clips in the dry as well. In the main event, I saw a lot from Cole Nelson as well, who was fighting hard. A lot of your 206 guys compared to, let's say, Brandon or Gary. Gary's a 206 guy as of recent, but he's a crossover guy. Runs a lot of both. And some of the experienced racers were waiting. They weren't going to crowd it. It was very similar, honestly, to the Chase Elliott, Kevin Harvick situation from Bristol, where guys were kind of bloody in their own nose by hanging it tight on the outside. And here's an example of ultimately where it ended up biting Corey a little bit later. And I'm not going to put Brandon totally on the spot, but we obviously have to since he's on the show, trying to go on the inside. Again, Corey tried to crowd him, and that time Brandon didn't end up backing out of it. And Brandon, I'll let you put it in your own words here and kind of walk us through, because this was all within about a lap and a half.
Yeah, so I mean, like, it's very difficult to pass in a 206 in Newcastle, so it is. Then when you put it in the wet, it was even 10 times more difficult. And I mean, Corey was, I can't really blame him for what he was doing, because in the rain, he technically had the preferred line and it was a faster line. But the only problem I see with like a lot of the 206 racing, even in the dry, is everyone tries to just stick on the outside of you, and eventually a driver's going to come up to you and they're going to try and pass you, and you're going to stay on the outside, and they're going to get frustrated, and you're going to wind up losing more spots than the one that you would have just gave up. So like my take on it is I think more people need to, when someone gets on the inside of you, I mean, they kind of have the preferred line. You just got to kind of give up the spot and go attack them in the next corner and do the same thing back. And hopefully they'll give it up to you too. Now, I know Cup Karts, like in their drivers meeting, they were really strict on if someone's on the outside of you, had to give them racing room, which they were giving penalties for people pushing other people off the track, which in like our 2-cycle stuff, side to side contact isn't quite as strict, because we look at it as when you're on the inside of somebody, you have the preferred line through the corner, the guy on the outside has to give it up. Where in the 4-cycle stuff, I think you're going just that little bit slower, that the guy on the outside can still hold the outside because you're not carrying as much speed, and they can still make it out of the corner and pass you and stay on the outside and pass you into the next corner. So that's the only thing. It was very difficult to pass. And you had to kind of pick and choose when you wanted to be over aggressive. And in this instance, I just got chopped down like 3 or 4 times in that whole lap. And the last lap, you can see I kind of slid right there, and we wound up hitting, and it is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, having watched a lot of it, and as a lesson to guys out there, this was in Heat 1, right? You'd absolutely expect someone to run you hard, run you tight, or maybe even crowd you down on lap number 1 or the final lap, or 2 laps to go, right? To run you tight into the corner, because in 206 racing, like Brandon said, braking zones are short. It's tough to get down the inside. It's tough to try and complete a pass. And when the race series is telling the guys that you're going to get a penalty if you're nose to nose or you're nosing ahead coming out of the corner, let's say you're about halfway up on him, push him out a little bit to just make him drop a wheel and eventually back out. You close the door on him. They're giving penalties out for that. So the guys are going to run on the outside, but it's kind of you can't have your cake and eat it too. Either you are going to let that happen, you're really not going to have a lot of passing, or what will happen is eventually what happened right there. It just ended up happening in the wet. I was trying to find more clips in the dry because it did happen a lot, and it happens a lot in 206 racing. And I catch a lot of flack for it because I try to train guys in the series that I go and officiate to do the opposite, to where we say, all right, if he's gotten in deep enough inside without a dive bomb, not hitting you in the apex, but getting far enough alongside before you even turn your wheel to go in the corner, you back out and get him next corner, exactly what Brandon said, because you end up with this catch-22. There were guys in the main event, I saw multiple guys where they would hold the outside just like how Corey did, but then in the similar situation a lap later, they're on the inside and they're running into the guy because obviously they can't complete the pass. So you can't be the aggressive guy on the outside and the aggressive guy on the inside when you race. And a lot of times that's where you end up running into if you don't pick one side or the other. You have to almost kind of police the dive bombing even a little bit harsher if you want to have them give racing room on the outside lane. And it's one of those things that's just so much different with karting than car racing, because car racing, the radii are a lot longer in the corner, and the corners are typically a lot longer. Karts pivot really quickly. The corners are super, super fast. So the passes happen like that. They're not like a long car corner, especially in sports cars. And Connor, you can attest to that from running Trans Am, running SCCA. I mean, you guys will run side by side very easily, almost effortlessly, for 3, 4, 5 sweeping corners in a row.
Yeah. No, it's like what Brandon said. I kind of agree with Brandon on, if they're on your outside, then it's not your corner. And that's what I learned in Europe. That's what's starting to come into play here in the 2-cycle stuff here in America, is if you're not on the inside, then it's not your corner and you should give it up. And the person on the inside has every right to put you off on the exit if you're still on the outside. It's just not your line. And in cars, it's not seen as much. If someone's on your outside, you kind of just leave them no room, and they end up backing out of it. So it's something that in racing is kind of a common rule. And to see the outside, you have to leave room for the outside guy. It's kind of a pointless rule, and I don't really agree with it. But if the people are used to it and that's what they want to do, then that's what they want to do.
Matt, what do you have for thoughts here? Well, we got you on the show.
I think the situation's a little difficult, right? Because obviously the conditions weren't exactly optimal in Brandon's case, but it's tough because in some situations you definitely can hold the outside depending on the driver or depending on the corner. Obviously, there's certain corners where if you hold the outside, it could end pretty badly for you. But there's also some corners where it could be a switchback and could give you the good line for the next corner. So I think it's kind of a per corner, per race basis as far as whether or not it's a good idea to hold the outside. But you definitely do see a lot of newer drivers trying to hold the outside, and it doesn't end too well for them because they'll end up getting passed by 4 or 5 different people, and when instead they could just give up that inside for the one person and tuck in behind and be patient and wait for a good opportunity to pass either the next lap or next corner, depending on when a good opportunity for that is. So it's tough to say, but.
And that isn't to say like it's a blanket rule. This was a good comment here put in by Robert Warren on Facebook, which is Colin's father, and he was asking about what about passing on the outside, and that does happen in everything. I think it's almost like you got to nose ahead and you'll hold it. I don't think any series would not penalize an inside guy for washing up and clearing out a guy on the outside when you can make an outside move pass. I always say it's kind of like getting dunked on in racing because it's like pretty humiliating when someone can like round you around the outside and get clear. But the reason we wanted to bring that clip up, obviously the rain clip's not the best idea. There was a few times in the final, but there were multiple drivers that ended up not being in this final group here with Gary, with Colin, with Brandon. And the reason that the battling broke out wasn't because it was so easy to pass. It was honestly because they were making it so hard on each other. And that's what opened the gap up in the beginning, is that those guys there in that group behind them were fighting passes so hard that they ended up losing time for the whole group even more so. And so in 206 racing, it's really important. And you struggle with the fact that guys forget, even in Adrian's case, he kind of forgot maybe how quickly when those guys catch up, you're not going to lose them again, which is why Colin was pushing him so far, and how much, when they catch up in a pack, right? That pack can get broken by guys fighting too hard, but it's so hard to break that's why Colin was trying to push him all the way till 2 laps to go. The only reason that pack even really broke up in the first place was because there were guys holding it tight on Brandon, holding it tight on Gary around the outside. If that pass goes through, just like what happens right here with Colin and Adrian going into that section, Adrian gave room. If Adrian doesn't go back to the outside to cross him up here, Colin's going to track out probably normally, or maybe he'll block going into this corner, but Adrian would have been second. And that was ultimately the second mistake that he ended up making through the lap, was going to the outside there. The rest of the lap didn't really happen too much because they all kind of spaced out speed-wise. Gary ended up actually making a pass around the outside on Colin going down into the first corner because Colin blocked down to the bottom. He got clear all the way in and just stuffed it deep around the outside lane, which was really cool and cuts off right after this clip. But the reason why the clip's important is Adrian would have been still in a good spot even with losing the lead right here because he gave it up versus trying to crowd Colin. If he crowds Colin, he's probably going to end up at the edge of the racetrack and losing even more momentum. And that would have allowed, like Brandon and Gary said, to get all the way up, get around him, and get clear completely. Both of them go from third and fourth to first and second of those guys fighting too hard. Happened a lot in turn number 1 and happened a lot in other places. So for a momentum series that's so draft reliant, that like knowing when to give and when not to give is important. But the holding around the outside, you end up losing maybe 7 or 8 tenths when you would have lost about 3 on the pass. Anyway, that's a good bit of the racing that came out of it. The good part was, though, a lot of the racing other than that was pretty clean. They had no red flags on the weekend. I think there were a couple flips, but there wasn't really too much bad stuff that happened overall. It's the first weekend I think that they've had that. And a big kudos as well that I wanted to give to the Cup Kart staff is the way that they handled, honestly, the bracket system and through the heats. Regardless of where you may stand on penalties and where we stand and stuff like that, the weekend went off pretty much without a hitch, red flag wise, a lot because they limited the karts on track to around 40 to 50. They ended up starting 50 for the finals, which is a little wild, but that was the only class that ended up having more than 40 karts on track on a consistent basis was the senior light class. The sportsmen's, they even capped down to 40, which was a really good call. So hats off, kudos to the crew with Greg and Steve Vermeer and Greg Jasperson, and of course the race director, Rick Folt. I think they made a really good call there. And so again, tip of the hat to those guys. Absolutely. Now, we're still, unfortunately, as a heads up to the audience here, as much as we would have loved to have Dan Roach with us, he's still continuing to have a little bit of connection issue. So we'd like to put it up to you guys more as we continue to talk the Racecraft debate. And I'm going to see if I can get us a couple more clips here during the commercial break. When we come back, scenarios you'd like to ask us about or where you think any of the top drivers would stand. Or for myself, I can't necessarily say that I'm that anymore, but I could definitely be an official and actually making calls on that stuff. Anyway, if you guys would want to send in those questions, or for Matt's case, a guy who coaches drivers on a regular basis now, where we would stand with that, and where you would find ultimately also where all those major series stand as well, for all of us having competing coast to coast, east and west, and everything else in between. Again, stick with us, KC Happy Hour, right back after this.
I'm Billy Vincent, owner of MPG Motorsports. What we do at MPG is we try to keep it a nice, fun family atmosphere, try to combine sort of the bigger things and of the bigger teams and the professionalism down with sort of some of the fun sort of family-oriented atmosphere. We try to not only develop drivers, but also the parents and the families for just in knowledge in general in motorsports. It all starts in karting. What we try to do is try to help the drivers, the moms, the dads understand the sport of motorsports in general, not just karting, but what it takes to get all the way up through. Whether you end up wanting to be a driver or a mechanic or an engineer, you know, we can help you with that, and that's what we're here for. If you're interested in joining us at MPG, our home base is at Whiteland Raceway Park in Indianapolis, and you can contact us at info@willpowerkart.com, and one of our great people will reach out to you, and we'll try to put the best program together.
KC Happy Hour is presented by Precision Performance Karting. PPK is the exclusive South Florida dealer for Coyote Motorsports kart racing chassis and Coyote's newest distributor. However, owner John Seglem and Coyote Motorsports' relationship spans across numerous decades in the sport, meaning that you've got years of winning expertise at your service. PPK offers trackside support at all of the CKNA South Division events, the CKNA Majors, such as the Spring Nationals and the Grand Nationals, the Sunshine State Karting Challenge, and a number of club races in the Southeast. PPK also has an impressive driver roster at these events, racking up multiple wins and podiums in 2021 with longtime Coyote Motorsports driver Chris Carroll and KC Happy Hour's own Paulie Massimino and Brandon Jarsacrack. If you're looking to get on the same race-winning equipment as these drivers, from the Coyote Motorsports chassis to the Odenthal motor mounts and Greyhound racing seats, Precision Performance Karting has you covered. Check out Precision Performance Karting on Facebook and Instagram, or email them at ppkartingfl@gmail.com.
So I want to have everyone bear with us a little bit here as we're kind of riding on the fly. Unfortunately, our last segment, of course, and a lot of our second segment was meant to be with Dan to talk about the state of Briggs Racing and what they've got moving forward. We had a lot of questions lined up, but he's obviously got just a bit of issues with our end trying to get the systems to work, so it's just not going to work out. So tonight we're going to continue the Racecraft talk, and like I said, I mentioned the Kevin Harvick and Chase Elliott debate. Obviously, this Kevin's son Keelan races a good bit here in karting. He's had a heck of a year. Connor coaches him a whole lot with the Nitro Kart crew because that's where he ends up running with. Keelan also won over the course of the weekend. CKNA Grands and Sportsman did a heck of a job. But here, before we get to that incident from Bristol and give our take on it, then we got one good question here. This one's actually from Darius Skolt. This is a coach question. How do you train a driver to give good and workable feedback? Some drivers may struggle to get a few words out while others can talk all day. So this is actually a really good one. Let's see. Connor, Brandon, Matt, you guys have all been doing a lot of coaching this year. Connor, why don't we give it to you first? You've been working with a lot of kids, probably more than the rest of us.
Yeah, no, I have one kind of strategy that I use for kids is I put them on, like, I give them a wild setup and tell them to go out there and tell me what it feels like. And when they don't really know what the go-kart feels like, when you change it a lot, they're going to know what it feels like. So you go out, change it a ton, and then they come in, tell you what's wrong with it. Then you go the opposite direction and let them go out, and then they tell you what's wrong with it. And then you kind of just narrow it down slowly. And eventually they'll be able to tell the difference of the smallest changes. And that's the way I learned as well. As Gary Willis took me out to the kart track one day and just did random stuff to the go-kart, like rear bar and taking the front bar out, changing axles and doing all that. And I wouldn't really know what everything meant at that time. So I kind of just went out and felt it and gave him feedback on what I felt. And that's the way I learned to feel how the go-kart's handling and give feedback when I came in.
Brandon, what would you like to add to that?
I mean, yeah, pretty similar to what Connor said.
There he goes.
Am I in there?
Yeah, you're good.
Pretty similar to what Connor said. I mean, that's kind of how I learned too, was just do some off-the-wall stuff to the kart and get your feedback on it. But what I do with most of my kids right now is you just have to talk like straight, like just right away to you. You got to like shape your questions in the way that a kid would understand, of like, do you not feel like you have an end turn into the corner, stuff like that. And then you can eventually start getting the right information out of them. And then once you do that for a few days or a few weeks, few months, whatever the case may be, then they'll learn what this feels like, and then they'll wind up telling you it on their own. So it's just basically how you got to shape questions to ask them, and then they'll understand it.
That's good too. I think Race Liberante had a really good point on this question too. When you're trying to get feedback out of them, and building off Brandon's point of shaping the question, each kid's going to be a little bit different. So Darius, I'm not sure if you've got your own kid of yours that you're working with specifically, or if you end up working with a mix. But Race especially made a good point of how he and just every coach, I mean, they all have to talk to kids a little bit different. And that's how the best coaches, the best team owners are, is understanding each driver is a different animal, and you have to talk to them a little bit differently. He's talking about one kid on a show we had a couple weeks back. He would have to throw the football to him. And so whenever he'd throw the football to the kid back and forth, that's the only way that the kid could focus, almost like a hyperactive, mind he had. Whereas some other kids, they'll take notes. Mike Doty talks, and Brandon, you could talk on this. Little Vivek Canthan was the one that I know of really, really well that Mike's worked with. Really impressed with that kid, and a big shout out to him. He's had a good year again this year. Fantastic year the year before. But for him, he talked to him. The kid wouldn't say too much, if I'm not mistaken. And then he's like, oh, okay, maybe he's retaining it, maybe he's not. And he went over, and he always saw him writing or making doodles or looking like something on his on a pen and paper. And it turned out he made notes of every single thing that Mike had said. Mike just didn't really understand it. So as soon as he kind of noticed that, it's like, wow, like not only is this kid really into it, but this is the way that he kind of processes it as well.
Yeah, there's a few kids that do that in our tent. Not many, but a few do it, where if you go on like a track walk, there's a few kids that actually carry around like a notepad and write down what we're saying, or like they'll go back in the trailer and they'll start like drawing out a corner. Then they'll come over to you and be like, okay, how should I take this, like this way? And then they kind of explain what the go-kart's doing and like each part of the corner too. So it's actually a really good, it's a really good tool to like have your child or the kid you're coaching just write down what they're thinking or like draw it out, because sometimes I know for me, I'm more of like a visual learner. So if they can actually like see it down somewhere, they might learn it better than just trying to explain it with words.
Got another question just came in from Brandon C on YouTube, and this one's actually another good one as well. He was asking all of us as racers of what we do with school. So Connor, remind me, are you in online school, Connor, or do you have public school back home?
Yeah, I'm online.
Yeah. So there's actually a couple programs. I've seen one especially based, I think, out of North Carolina. It's a motocross group that Nikita Johnson does. It's like Motocross Base is the name of the school, but it's like Racer or something in the school. But you'll see a lot of kids probably doing online school. For Brandon and I, we both went to public school all the way through. It was just a balance, right? The issue that, now a lot more kids are having than what we did coming up. And granted, I barely raced national races or traveled all too much. Was, the race weekends have gotten steadily longer and longer. What was just a Friday through Sunday weekend's now a Thursday and sometimes a Wednesday weekend. Even CKNA this weekend was a Thursday to Sunday, and it had to be. It's a one-off. They had way too many drivers to do anything probably other than that if they were going to give ample amounts of practice. But a lot of them end up doing online school. For me personally, when I was doing it, I can't say it was so much when I was driving, but it was a lot when I was announcing. I actually did dual enrollment, which is you can do that from your junior year of high school on, where you would go and take college classes at a college course, and you would get high school and college credit. And I would structure my classes to be Monday night and Wednesday night, because they'd only meet 2 times a week, and then Tuesday night or Tuesday morning and Thursday morning classes. So I could fly out Thursday afternoon, come back Monday night, and I wouldn't miss anything. And I just kind of did that routine for a little bit while I was going through college. And then eventually I got a full-time job working at a racetrack and then finishing online. So online school is the short answer. Not a lot drop out, although you will see a lot of kids, like, for example, Braden has got his high school degree. He's taking kind of a gap year, you could say, before college to see where the racing stuff goes, because sometimes that stuff could pick up really, really quickly. And you see a lot of guys do that as well, where they maybe don't necessarily go straight into their bachelor's or into college with racing. They'll wait a moment or two, because there's nothing wrong with waiting, especially if you got to spend money on that and you got to spend money on racing. That's expensive. But you'll see a lot of guys do it online. And Brandon, you kind of, how did you structure your college classes? Because you got an engineering degree.
Yeah, it was very difficult, because I actually I raced full time and I went to school full time, and then pretty much whenever I wasn't racing or going to school, I was working. So it was very difficult. But the way I did it was try to schedule all my classes like Monday through Thursday, and I was very fortunate. I went to a pretty small campus of Penn State, and all the teachers had a really good relation with their students, and I would go up to my teachers the first week of classes and lay out like what my racing schedule was and be like, these are the times I'm going to miss, and this is when I will be able to be here. And luckily, all my teachers were very very understanding, and they kind of helped me. And it was nice because I wound up having maybe only like 5 to 6 teachers throughout my entire college career. So most of them knew by the end of it that my racing was pretty serious, and they worked with me a lot. So it's a lot about what kind of like teacher you have, and also being like straight up with your teachers, that you go to them right on the first day of school or first week of school and just explain to them what kind of situation you're in. And then they tend to be a lot more understanding at that point.
And Matt, I mean, you traveled a lot racing yourself, and especially with your brother. Did you ever end up doing online stuff for a little bit?
Yeah, so my senior year, I did the first semester of my senior year, I did kind of something similar to you, dual enrollment. But I only went to school on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So I only went in person 2 days a week, and the rest of it was online. And then the last part of my senior year, I actually had one class, and that was a college class. So kind of a similar thing. It's really tough to be in traditional school, especially once you start getting into your junior and senior year when school's a little more serious. You kind of have to either decide, am I going to college? Am I going the university route? Or, am I going to try and pursue things racing wise? Because it definitely does get tough. But like Brandon said, sometimes you get lucky and you have good teachers and you can kind of work things out. But other times it's not exactly that case. And, tests and quizzes are usually on Thursdays and Fridays. So definitely makes it tough when it comes to going to big races.
And I also know one kid who was a cadet kid, but he went to a private school. It wasn't like a super, super crazy private school, but they actually like fully supported it. And there's a handful of schools also where like they'll be very supportive. But it's a common problem a lot of the parents have too, is how to manage the days off. And that's where we end up cherry picking races. And as we get towards looking of what the next year's schedule is going to look like, where it seems like CKNA is going to have, not seems like, they just announced they're going to have 2 more major events, or 1 more major event than this year. So they're going to have 3 majors, non-points each. You kind of end up having guys cherry pick, and a lot of the races also get moved into the summer months. But it's a balance. It's a hard balance. I mean, Brandon, Matt and Connor could all tell you it just means a lot of nights at a hotel room as soon as you're done at the racetrack doing homework. So it's not necessarily the most fun thing in the world. Ryan Fisher, this is a good one. And Brandon, Brandon, did you ever end up driving the MG orange tires? I'm sure you probably did a little.
I might have tested them, but they might not have been an orange at the time. So I probably have been on them. I just didn't know I was.
Yeah.
But I kind of agree. Like he's saying, do we think the harder tire for the 206 is better? I agree. I think, like, for instance, this weekend we ran the Vega Red for the CKNA Nationals. I honestly think that tire is way too sticky for a 206, because around Newcastle, most of the corners were flat out using no brake whatsoever. There was very few braking zones, so it made it very hard to like pass. And you could honestly get stuck behind someone who was half a second slower than you pace-wise for multiple laps on end, just because you couldn't get that run on them because the braking zones were so short. I think if we went to a little bit harder tire, it would definitely make the racing more interesting, because you would extend the braking zone so it'd be a little bit easier to pass, and it would also make the kart setup a lot more harder to nail down.
Yeah, and to add on to that, Ryan, I think personally, like especially from like a club perspective, the harder you can go with the tire, the better, because typically those harder tires last a heck of a lot longer than the soft ones. It's just the nature of the beast. The softer, stickier tires lay down more rubber. You get less life out of them. Connor, did you ever end up running at GoPro when they were still on the Hoosier compounds in cadet or micro?
Yeah, I did, but when I was running them, I didn't know what I was feeling, and I was just driving.
I grew up on the D1s.
Yeah,
Mojo
that's
D1s.
A Rotax kid.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, the harder tire I think makes a lot better 206 racing. You definitely also wouldn't have like what we talked about earlier, where guys are really having to let out of the gas on the outside, because there just wouldn't be as much grip, and you'd have to brake so much more to go on a wider, or you'd have to struggle to run the wider line. When you have that much more grip, as much as they did with the sticky tire, it was that much easier to kind of keep it around the outside. You couldn't get out braked really, because the braking zones were really short. So great question, Ryan. But I think what those guys are doing, and I think what your preference is, 100% on point there. Going back to the school question, here's from Philip Newquicks, a viewer here for the last few weeks and big supporter of the show. He's saying he went to public school full time. All the time when he had a race, he'd let all the teachers know they'd allow you to manage the work after the race weekend, which is pretty cool. I know a lot would end up giving you the work before. And then this is Brent Taylor, Austin Taylor. Shout out to Austin. He had a heck of a weekend. He was top 3, I think second, if I'm not mistaken, in 206 Kid Kart this weekend. So close. A good run for them. And he was talking about how this is obviously a new kid, public school up front, and it works out. So sometimes you get a little bit lucky, sometimes you don't. But back to the school question. Truth is, it's just a lot of time management that isn't too much fun. So, and then Colin Cart 816, Colin Lloyd asking what the best karting simulator is for PC. Connor, you're sitting in a simulator. I know you've tried Kart Racing Pro, right?
Yeah. No, there's no like very accurate karting simulator, but if I were to pick one, it would obviously be KRP Racing Pro. That's what all the kids that race use, and I've played it sometimes too. It's very unrealistic, but you can see the tracks. That's about all it's good for, is seeing what the tracks look like before you actually go to them. But that's about it, honestly. And the simulators and wheels, you can get anything from RC, what I have, anything from them. Any Fanatec product is good, and anything from those two, you'd be fine. And then just an obvious TV or a monitor to put it on, to put it on a screen. But it's not that. I'm not really a technical connoisseur, so I'm not the best person to ask. I'm sure there's YouTube channels and stuff like that will give a better review than I will.
Yeah, this is another reason we can't wait to have Braden back. He'll be able to talk about it a little bit more. I think when it comes down here, Philip had a really good point talking about physics as well in the chat. Kart Racing Pro, a lot of parents I know have it because you have all the tracks built out. And a good bit of that was actually, I think, probably from when I ran a league on there a few years ago. And we built a lot of the tracks off GPS data, which was really, really cool. And a lot of that community is still there. A lot of the same guys are there. If you get on some of those forums and those message boards, if you download your Micron data, your GPS data from any track, you can go to those guys, give them anywhere. I don't know what their fee is. I don't think it's that expensive because they're all really passionate, but they'll build out the track for you. And so, at least you won't necessarily be able to learn markers like iRacing, which is obviously pretty good for car racing. But at least you can kind of just have some fun. You'll learn the layout, like Connor said, so you're at least going to turn some laps on it before you go there in the real kart. But I definitely wouldn't use those markers as zones. And Brandon's been like seat of the pants. We just got Brandon to start doing data like 4 years ago, so he's like the last guy we should talk to later.
Yeah, I don't own a simulator. I was really close to getting one when the COVID shutdown happened, but then they went through the roof, and I never wound up getting one. And yeah, like you said, I wasn't very in on the data for the longest time, but lately I've been getting more into it. Yeah.
Here, I wanted to show in before we finally wrap this up. I did get the clip pulled, so we'll see how good it'll play for us. Let's see what we've got here. So this is from the onboard. I wanted to talk about Bristol because this is right on with what we were talking about when it comes to when to give and when not to. And that's really what the outside, holding the outside boils down to, is it's not necessarily a matter of right of way, left lane, or right lane. It's just about when you should still be able to hold it. Because if a guy just barely puts his nose to the inside of you, and these guys can back me up here, if you're still nosing ahead at all coming out of the corner or through the center of the corner, you're probably going to be fine. I mean, it's normally a very late move. But what really happens when you hold the outside is you crowd that inside guy down, and you're basically saying you either need to back out from this pass and give some space or hit me. And we don't have wide, long radius corners in karting. So a lot of times the hit me happens. And this is an example when at Bristol here for these guys, the hit happened. So this was Chase Elliott, Kevin Harvick back and forth all the way through. We'll watch on board right here. And I think this is actually after the incident. So yeah, you can see. So I'll pause it right here. This isn't the greatest angle. I think they'll probably change the angle later in the video. I just got this clip for us. But Kevin, you can see Chase is right down middle of the racetrack. Now they kind of diamond these corners where they go in low, slide up a little in the middle, come back low on exit, and then swing back out to the wall. But Chase is right down on Kevin's door. And from what Kevin said in the interview is that he was like, hey, man, like you were running me hard. This is lap 467. They still have a little over 30 laps to go. So they still have time if Chase lets him go to kind of go back to him and slide up on the inside or try to get to him again, or maybe put the bumper to him, which happens at Bristol a lot. But instead, he wanted to run him hard in that corner for that pass. And I guess had been going on a lot for that race. And you could see in the picture here, Kyle Larson's coming. Well, when Chase runs light, that's when they touch right there. Then the tire goes down in the left front. He ends up pulling in. So then this is later in the race, when the retaliation happened, Chase got in front of him, kind of pulled him off. Let me see if we can does it go over to Chase's view? No, this is all just from the post-race stuff. I thought we had a little better clip of it. But I don't know if Brandon Connor, I have to imagine you probably watched it being as close with
I was watching
Keelan as you are. But Brandon, did you end up watching the Bristol night race too?
Yeah, that was actually one of the first NASCAR races I've watched in like 4 years. It was definitely interesting. I mean, I kind of honestly don't really remember what happened, but I don't know if it was the same instance as like someone trying to stay on the outside, but you could definitely see from that view, like Chase was a little bit behind, so he probably should have given way a little bit more to Harvick and tried to tuck in and maybe get back around him, but it's kind of hard to tell from that view.
It was just hard racing, honestly.
That's what I would boil it down. Yeah, that's what I would boil it down to, just hard racing. I mean, Bristol's so tight, and you see that all the time. It's kind of not much you could really do.
Yeah, which my only point with it is, hard racing's fine. Even holding the outside, you could argue is hard racing, right? I mean, that happens. Connor, you've done it. Brandon, you've done it when it comes down to final laps, especially when you have a driver that you feel like is not going to come up and door you on the exit of the corner for whatever reason. You feel like you can kind of – there's some guys that will wreck you and some guys you feel like don't or may not. So you can, push your weight around. But it's timing, right? If you do that in the heat race, like what not this one, sorry, wrong clip we had pulled up. But this is back at heat number 1 where with Corey and Brandon. And instead, this is halfway through first heat race of the weekend. And this is just one of those deals. If you want to fight for it, you can. If you really want to win the heat race, if this was the final lap, you'd totally understand. But we're halfway through on the first heat, and this is a class, the light division, that had 52 go-karts in. Now, luckily for Corey, the spin wasn't any bit worse when it did happen. But this is just a learning experience for any drivers tuning in. When we talked about surviving the heat race, this is exactly what we're talking about. And, of course, to knock on Brandon, Brandon was going hard for it too. So we can get mad at Brandon for going a little too hard in the heat race also. But
yeah,
two to tango.
Yeah, exactly. The only problem was I was definitely way faster than Corey, and I knew that Logan was right behind me, and then Jake was coming pretty quickly. So if I would have stayed behind him much longer, it just would have brought more people into the race, and I just I thought I had him cleared 3 times, but I didn't. So.
And Brandon, the clip did go live today, so we do got it. Whether you got to answer it or however you answer it, you have to. 206 is push racing. You were lined up coming down the front stretch. I tried to pull the clip up, didn't really pull up well, but you can go check our Kart Chaser social medias. Straight away, lined up behind Gary, Adrian behind Colin. You moved over from behind Gary. You gave Colin just a little bit of a nudge, purpose or on accident, and Colin ends up winning. So this guy wants to know, what was the decision?
Well, when we came out of the last corner, Gary was actually 2 wheels off the track. So I kind of made up my mind at that point that if I would have pushed Gary, it wouldn't have got us any farther forward. And plus, we messed up on the gears pretty bad. So there was no way I was going to stay on anyone's bumper the entire straightaway. So I only gave Colin a very, very little push. But like I said, Gary was hanging 2 wheels off the track because Colin was crowding him a little bit, which I would have done the same thing. But yeah, I mean, that was the only reason I really went with Colin. And I think anyone would go with someone on the inside versus someone on the outside.
Fair enough. Guys, we're going to wrap the show up on that. Again, we're going to work with Dan Rocha, everyone, about trying to get him on the show very, very soon, hopefully with a good enough connection, because I know a lot of you tuned in, and I do apologize about that. We were all excited to have him on here. You'll get to see a little bit of the interview I did with him when our full Kart Chaser edit from the CKNA Grand Nationals comes out this Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central Time. So that'll be coming. We'll have clips from that coming up as well. And we've got some really funny mic'd up segments we started to do on the grid. We'll have the best of the mic'd up segments coming up. Brandon's laughing because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. We had a blast with that. We're going to have some more mic'd up segments coming at Go for Motorplex for the US ProKart Series finale there as well. We'll throw a mic on Connor, send Connor on the Connor cam on a rampage up and down the grid. And
you get like a helmet cam.
Yeah.
Like one of the GoPro forehead straps so you can mount
the chesty. You got to get the chesty.
Yeah, we need to get a chest cam for you.
Yeah,
hook 'em
there you
up.
go. Something like that.
And a little teaser. Hopefully we can get some of these guys on the guest, but there are some big names that are going to be on the entry list at the US ProKart Series event at Go for Motorplex. We are super excited to announce those when we can. So tune in next Monday. Hopefully no more Facebook and Instagram servers going down, and we're actually going to be on time on our regular night. Thank you guys for joining us. As always, KC Happy Hour. Take it easy. We'll see you guys next time.
Adios.